Thank you, Michel. Can you hear me in the back row? Can you hear me in the back row if I talk in a normal voice? Sorry, we don't have any sound reinforcement tonight. So one of our presenters I know uses his outdoor voice more than he should, and our other presenter I hope won't be strained by it. But good evening and welcome to the CBC and to the March meeting of the Toronto section of the Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineers. My name's Paul. I'm the chair of the section. It's my privilege to chair this fine group on our board. I have one announcement related to that. The elections for our board are open. It's that time of the year again when SMPTE elects board members. So I encourage you all to log in to SMPTE.org and cast your ballot. We're re-electing this year a new chair, a new secretary-treasurer, and some new managers. So please go to the website and vote. Very, very important for us. We'd like to thank our sponsor this evening, Aspera, and thank you, Michel. She'll be speaking soon. But thank you so much for sponsoring the meeting, and a pleasure to have you come. Thanks for, you made it okay, coming from the airport at like 4:15. She left the airport at like 4:15, okay? Listen to the, So anyway, we have a wonderful meeting this evening. Not only do we have Michel, who's wonderful, she's been at our tech seminar last year. And by the way, I'm going to be speaking to both of you. I have witnesses now about our tech seminar next year and how welcome you will be. And we also have, of course, our good friend Michel Proulx, who you all know. So, without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Tony Maracher. He and his co-organizer Sylvia Fan have done a fabulous job putting this evening together. Tony, take it away.
Thank you. Thanks, Paul. Good evening, everybody. Again, Aspera for the pizza and the drinks and everything outside. So, if I can borrow the clicker.
Yep, that's forward right there.
Perfect. Again, it's sorry, that's me, Tony. And Sylvia, we co-organize this, and it's on OTT. We have, and I'm going to coin the phrase from Sylvia. We have Michel and Michel, so we're calling this Michel Squared. Michel Proulx, he's television industry expert, advisor. He's a digital crusader. And what I didn't put on here was he's also a avid ski buff, which I think this year he didn't get much of because of bad year out west. Yep. And then Michel Monson as well, CEO and co-founder of Aspera. And both are going to be speaking on OTT. Now, they've got two long rap sheets. And the takeaway from this is that
ski bum.
Yeah, there we are. And so you guys can read that. And likewise with Michel Monson, who is CEO, co-founder of Aspera, and both are active SMPTE members. And if anybody here are not SMPTE members, I'll put on my SMPTE hat and say you should become members. And that's not mine. So we're going to hand it over to Michel, and what we're going to do is Michel's going to speak. We're going to take questions because he's got to get a flight back to Montreal tonight. So we'll sign off with Michel, and then Michel two, and then come on board, and then we'll have her presentation, and then we'll have questions for her afterwards as well. Michel, take it away.
Well, thanks, Tony, and thanks for also understanding that I've got a sort of a tight window because, yes, of course, I've overbooked myself and I have to fly back to Montreal. So I'll be doing this, dropping a couple of bombs. Some of the subjects I'll talk about, a couple of bombs, and then doing the typical French Canadian thing: to drop a bomb and get on a plane and go back to Montreal. So I apologize in advance for both those things, for the bombs and for the leaving. Thanks to Tony and Sylvia for inviting me to do this and for organizing for me to be here. I appreciate it. It's a good crowd, and it's good to do this in English. I've been doing a lot of work in Montreal these past few months, and I may have lost some of my vocabulary. So if you see any French words in the presentation, I think I've taken them all out, but there could be some leftovers. Okay, so what I'm going to be talking about is sort of, I liked the headline that you had in the notice, right? My title was some big complicated thing, including a word I'm not even sure is a word, digitization. But I liked the headline that you came up with, which is online video, or OTT, is it changing our world? And I think it's pretty obvious. I think the answer to this is yes. changing doesn't mean destroying. It's changing it. I'm actually here to talk about a change, a particular change that's I think going to happen that we sort of should be aware of and participate in. So if you look at what my agenda looks like, so I have 4 topics. The first one is I'm going to talk about this ecosystem. And some of you have seen my ecosystem drawing before. And actually use that ecosystem to explain what I mean by digital. There's a lot of engineers in this room, so we probably don't all have the same definition of digital. Just a little forewarning, my definition of digital is not SDI and it's not ATSC. It's something different, and I'll talk about that. The next thing I'm going to say is there are many things that digital changes, but I'm going to focus on 2 big things that digital changes. And then just to sort of make or support my case that digital is happening, I'm going to talk about 5 recent disruptions that have happened that should all be food for thought for all of us. So these are 5 big pieces of news that have happened that are sizable and that I think we should think about. And then at the end is sort of I guess this is my punchline. Could and should advertising go digital? Again, using the definition of digital that I'll set up. And I don't want to sort of, in case I run out of time and I don't get to finish, it could happen, it's happened before. The answer to this is yes. I believe advertising is well on its way to becoming digital, and we have to understand what that means. And it doesn't exclude us, it just changes the way we do things. So in case I missed that part or I have to leave, the answer to that is yes. So having set that up, let me get started. So the ecosystem. So how many people have not seen me do this drawing before? All right, so this is a drawing that I've been drawing for years and years and years. I call it the ecosystem. It's kind of the food chain of what goes on in our industry. And in this example of it, I've put a bunch of logos, and I apologize if I missed your logo. But it kind of shows the sort of the content creation and value chain, starting with content creation on the left. The next group, or actually this time I'll start from the right. We do content distribution. These are what we call our BDUs, broadcast distribution units, what our American friends call MVPDs. These are the cable companies and satellite companies and telecom companies that resell services. They're in the main business of distribution. Then we've got different types of broadcasters, specialty channel or cable channel broadcasters, and then traditional over-the-air broadcasters. Right? These people do content aggregation. They pull together content. Right? I don't know how many of you think that with the last round of CRTC news, if next year when we draw this slide, or sorry, in 2016, if we won't lose some of these logos. I think that's the debundling thing is a real concern for me. Okay, and then we have content creation that either happens with content creators or the broadcasters, particularly around news, create their own content as well. So that's kind of the ecosystem. And this is the ecosystem the way it existed, say, 10 years ago. Right? Pretty simple. We have over the air, and we have this distribution through cable companies. Right? Then 2005, which is, strangely enough, only 10 years ago, right? This thing called YouTube shows up, right? And it's what I would call internet video. It's videos on our computers, right? At this point, 10 years ago, we really didn't have smartphones and tablets. Those really didn't exist yet. They were on the verge of existing, but they didn't. And then essentially what we had at that case was user-generated content, cat videos, and pirated content sort of showing up on our computers. I'm putting YouTube up there as the big one. I'm always sort of picking the big one. 2008, Netflix. So Netflix, not that old, well, older than this because they were doing DVDs before this, but Netflix sort of came on the scene doing streaming about 2008, right? And that sort of changes things because instead of being UGC and pirated content, it's actually legit content coming from different parts of the value chain. Content creators, broadcasters themselves putting up content on Netflix. Right? And that's sort of the beginning of online video. Now, online videos evolved quite a bit, and just to be sure that I'm clear, I'm talking about professional video at this point. I'm talking about the same kind of content that we had in the traditional infrastructure being distributed in this new way, right? Now, a lot of you, and I've just got one example here, 2Point TV, sort of being from Montreal, that's a major player in the OTT space, but that's a portal, an OTT portal that belongs to a traditional broadcaster. And so it's not just people like Netflix, there are broadcasters who've actually done this kind of thing and are being moderately successful. Okay? I hid the slide, but I can't help myself. In the US, local broadcasters today, fairly recent stat, about 10% of their advertising revenue, 10% of their advertising revenue is actually coming from their digital platform, from their websites, right? Or mostly around their news content, right? Some of it's banner ads, but some of it's pre-roll ads and those kind of ads on content they've put, their news content that they've put on these OTT portals. 10% of their advertising revenue. Pretty significant, and growing very quickly, growing at about 25% a year. Right? So it's not insignificant. Okay, this is fairly recent. I don't know, I get these emails and I always read up on these things. Not that I'm Nielsen's biggest fan. In fact, in about 10 slides, you're going to hear me make fun of them and diss them. But they put out this report called the Audience Report, and it varies from quarter to quarter. But the latest one just came out, and it talks about the sort of the end of 2014. And there's some pretty stunning statistics in there that I thought I'd pull out. So this only came out a few days ago. First number is that 40.3% of Americans, and I realize this kind of data isn't available for Canada, so I have to focus on our next door neighbors. 40% of US households subscribe to at least one subscription VOD service, right, of the type of, the biggest one being Netflix with 36%, and then the other two players being much smaller, Amazon Prime and Hulu Plus. There's two Hulus, right? There's a free Hulu that you don't have to subscribe to, and there's Hulu Plus. This is the subscription one, right? So 6.5% of households, according to Nielsen, subscribe to these services. Right? Pretty interesting. That data is not so shocking. In fact, I probably think this number is lowish, my opinion, but here's a number that I think is more important. From the same report, minus 4% viewership in traditional TV. In other words, traditional TV is being watched less, right? Plus 60% viewership of online video streaming. So in other words, online video streaming is still small, but growing very, very quickly. You'll see that in the revenue numbers that I'll show in a few minutes. Okay. So that was just some numbers to warm up. I've got some other numbers. Okay, so first of all, I like to tell this story. It sort of justifies how I drew my drawing. So remember my drawing like this. So why do we call online video over the top? Well, it's because it's content creators and broadcasters to a certain extent going over the traditional distributor. Right? That's why we call it over the top. This drawing sort of explains that term. You've seen that term 1,000 times. Now you sort of see it drawn. But there's a twist to it. And we're not really going to talk about it. In the full version of this presentation, we end up talking about net neutrality and all these things sort of out of the scope of what I'm doing today. But if you think about it, over the top is through an internet service provider, right? We've all had to beef up our internet subscription to subscribe to Netflix. In fact, I give more extra money to Bell for Netflix than I do to Netflix, right? I give Netflix $8 a month. I give Bell an extra $20 a month so I can get a good enough bandwidth. Well, guess what? Who owns the ISP? Well, it's typically the pay TV distributor. I'm not sure of this number, but it's above 90% of internet subscriptions are coming from someone who also does pay TV subscription. It may even be higher than that. Right? So I say it's over the top and through the middle. Because, and that's why we're seeing some of this posturing that we're getting in the industry today is because of that very fact, right? So over the top, Netflix is sort of using the networks of pay TV distributors to eat their lunch, right? And that's kind of what's happening. Although, as I said, I'm paying more to Bell for that lunch than I am to Netflix. Okay, so here I'm finally getting to the part of why do some people, including me, call OTT digital? right? Why do I call it digital? We've got traditional distribution means here, and we've got what I'm calling digital. So what makes that digital, whereas this is not, right? So we know this, right? What we do here, in whether we're a broadcaster or a cable company, we mostly do linear live, and we do it using broadcast streams. In other words, whatever content we're playing out, all of our viewers see a copy of the same stream. It's a broadcast stream. Right? Whereas on the digital side, what you're seeing is, whether it's nonlinear content, we're seeing unicast streams. And this is what makes OTT digital.
Now, my PowerPoint does this to me every once in a while. I have to do this and then this, because I don't know if you saw it, but it started advancing on my behalf.
So I like to be in control. So, according to this slide, so what I'm saying is the fact that these are unicast streams as opposed to broadcast streams, this is what makes online video digital. The fact that they're using unicast streams. Right? That's my personal definition of what makes online video digital. Right? So I'm saying digital is TV over the internet? Yes, but it's more than that. It means that there's a one-to-one connection between the content and the consumer of the content, which can mean many things, but it can mean that content can be personalized and then consumed on demand. It means, and this is probably the most important one, that content access can be precisely controlled and measured. And then a third thing is kind of fairly obvious, is that content can be consumed on a variety of devices. Those are three attributes of this one-to-one connection. Well, why does it matter on a variety of devices? Well, it means that because I know you have a phone and your connection is so good, I'll stream one data rate to you, and you have a big TV and you have a big data rate, so I'm going to stream a bigger resolution at a higher bit rate. That's kind of the thing that I can do because I've got this one-to-one connection. I know who you are, I know what device you're using, I know a lot about you. Right? So, how big is digital today? And this number I've been maintaining. I look at Jeff in the back, he's seen me talk about these numbers for 8 years. When I was at Miranda, we were maintaining these numbers. But I've got up-to-date numbers now based on a source, which I will reveal. Okay, it's the PricewaterhouseCoopers Global Entertainment and Media Outlook. It's a report that they put out every year. I have a bit of a fudge added to it because they don't measure everything, and I've had to estimate that out of band, but I've lumped the numbers together. So what I'm going to do is sort of try to spell out, both for subscription fees, which is part of the revenue of this industry, and advertising, how the revenue is being distributed between these two groups. Right? So the first one is, and this is a worldwide number. Right? The first number is advertising on traditional television, 169 billion. Subscription fees on traditional television, 213 billion. And then there's this other thing called license fees. I don't know that we call them that here in Canada, but in the UK, for example, BBC gets these. I think people like TV Ontario and other people may get some of these, or we may not have these in Canada. They may all come from subscription fees, but in other geographies, they have this sort of public subscription fee called a license fee. But I've combined those together. So the total revenue for traditional broadcasting, advertising, and subscription is $414 billion. Pretty big number, right? And it's growing at about 4% a year, right? This is a 5-year compound annual growth. If I take this split and I go, okay, how much of that, how many subscription fees or how much advertising is going to digital, those are the numbers that I get. Now, this is where the fudging takes place. This is not on YouTube for cat videos. This is professional video content revenue, right? So this is for professional video. So that's why the advertising revenue is probably smaller than you'd expect it, but this is for the same kind of content, as I said earlier, that shows up down here. So the surprising thing there is it's quite small, right? 97% of this revenue and 97% of the advertising revenue is actually going to the traditional. But, so the share that digital is getting is still quite small, but it's growing at a much faster rate. And I can tell you that the first time I measured these numbers, it was 99.99%, and it's not that long ago, right? So what I'm trying to say here is that, yes, digital is small, but at least now we're measuring it, whereas just a few years ago, it was unmeasurable, it was too small, and it is growing very, very quickly. All right, so let's call these guys the $414 billion incumbents, and these people the $10 billion a year disruptors, because that's what they are. That's what Netflix is. Netflix, in my mind, is a Class A disruptor. Okay, so that was the ecosystem, right? With some numbers to try to make you size it up. And again, the big message is digital is small, but growing very quickly. Okay, so two things now that I think digital changes. The first thing is how and when content is consumed. And the second thing is how content is monetized. There are other things that it changes, but these are the two that I chose to talk about. So the first one is about our users, our viewers, and how they consume content. And let's just say that at this point, Netflix has single-handedly, or I say single-handedly, changed the rules here. They have changed the user experience in a way that people really like and won't ever go back, right? So the first shift that happens with digital is you get this shift from linear to non-linear. So linear TV is what we always knew as appointment TV. It's a channel grid with a schedule, and we are, the broadcasters, controlling what that schedule looks like, right? That's good old-fashioned must-see TV, appointment TV. Well, what we've got now is a model that's non-linear or on-demand, where you have content categories, random access, and viewing is controlled by the viewer, right? It's what I want, when I want, right? And people have this, they got it. There was VOD on cable, right, for many years, but frankly, the UI, the experience, sucked, right? Whereas Netflix, they really nailed it. You could pause a show on one device and watch it on another device, right? They've really done a good job of the on-demand, right? Controlled by the viewer. People like this, and we could never go back. You can't put this genie back in the bottle, right? Yes, there's content that is best consumed linearly. We all know live, right? Sports, right? But other than that, even sports, Olympics, how many people watch the Olympics live, right? I watch, yes, some events, hockey games and things like that, but the skiing events, right? CBC did a great job in their app. You could go specifically to a sport, specifically to an event. You could actually go to specific competitors. That was fun, right? That was useful. Not for all the sports, but for some of the sports. All right, so here's some Nielsen numbers. This is from their previous report. I don't know if I believe these numbers. What they're saying is in 2011, only 11% of people were watching TV this way. And in 2014, the number's gone up to 20%. I have to think that other than sports, the number has to be higher than this. In fact, Forrester actually says it's a specific age group that 40% of them, only 40% of them watch down here. The rest, 60%, watch up here. Right? Watch on demand. So that's the first shift. The second shift is pretty obvious. It's no longer just about the TV set. It's now also about these other devices. And again, this is another thing that I credit Netflix for, right? For having made it easy and made it seamless, right? And this is what we now call TV everywhere. Right? And these devices, particularly tablets, are becoming very pervasive, and people are watching TV on them. And again, this is another genie that will never be able to put back in the bottle. Okay, that was the consumer side, our viewer side. Here's our private side, how it works. Right? Remember, about 60% of the revenue of this industry worldwide is from advertising. Right? And it's been the same way forever. There's this company called Nielsen, or here in Canada, what's BBM called now? They have a new name. Numeris. Right? They've changed their name to sound. Numérique in French is digital, by the way. That's different. how content is monetized. So remember this picture that I drew? And I said that unicast streams, in my mind, is what makes over-the-top or online video, what makes it digital. So what's the difference? Well, with broadcast streams, which is what we do down below, what we do in a traditional bit here, with broadcast streams, we have targeting. Specialty channels are targeting, right? Cooking shows and sports shows, and that's targeting, but it's fairly broad targeting. And more importantly, and this is where I start peeing on Nielsen, the measurements that these people produce are very imprecise. I don't think in this audience, I don't know if you're someone like, I don't know, I did a presentation for the Aboriginal People's Television Network. Everybody knows them. They're absolutely not measured by BBM because their audience is not covered by BBM sample. Right? And with this, the fragmentation that now exists in the television offering, these sample sizes have not increased enough to make these measurements accurate. I don't know if you agree, if we would pee on Nielsen if we were in the US, right? Right, and I'll talk about that. There's one of the things I'll talk about a little bit later. Whereas with unicast streams, we get the ability to do fine targeting, and we get the ability to do precise measurement. So it's a pretty big difference between those two schemes. Right? So down here today, traditional, we're dealing with this situation. Whereas up there, the smaller guys, the challengers, the disruptors, have this more modern advertising scheme. So I'd say, in my mind, digital represents the most important change. My definition of digital represents the most important change in television since the beginning of television. And it's because the consumption models are giving people what they really, really want, and there's a potentially superior monetization model at our doorstep. And so, because of digital. So that's my first sort of takeaway. All right. Okay, I sort of wanted to get to my disruptions. So I've got 5 examples of things that have happened. Some of them are not that recent because the first one's quite a while ago, but the other ones some of them are very, very recent, right? Some of them are in the future. Some of them, this one here is 2 weeks from now, right? So the first one goes back to February 2012 when Netflix, who I still say is the 10,000-pound gorilla of OTT. They are the biggest name in OTT, right, worldwide, right? And what they did in 2012 is the year that they ended up having more subscribers than Comcast. And why am I picking on Comcast? Well, Comcast is the single largest cable company in the world, right, and in the US by subscriber count, right? And these numbers here, what I'm comparing here is, in red is Netflix paid subscribers, not the free ones, just the paid ones. And these are Comcast video subscribers. And I get this information, you can't tell here, but I actually read the financial reports of these two companies to get that information. This data is fresh, it's from their Q4 2014, so it's very fresh data, right? And what you see is that Netflix grew very, very quickly. And again, this is not international, this is just US. And what you see is that at the end of 2014, 22 million subscribers, which is pretty flat for the last 3 years for Comcast, and 38 million for Netflix. You know that Comcast is in the process of buying Time Warner Cable, which themselves have 11 million subscribers, but they're only taking 7 million of them. The other ones they have to sell off for competitive reasons. So they'll end up at 30 million. Which I believe is the cap on what a cable company, number of subscribers that a cable company can have because of regulations. No such regulations for these guys. Right, so that's pretty interesting. This chart sort of, makes Netflix look good. I don't have time to show them. I have charts that show ARPU, the revenue from each subscriber, and of course, the revenue per subscriber here is much, much smaller than the revenue per subscriber here, but there is a lot more growth here than there is there. So, all right, so I just threw this in. If you factor in international, Netflix is now at 55 million paid subscribers. That's at the end of 2014. And international So domestically, they grew 18%. So this number grew 18%. But internationally, they grew 72%. And as you know, they're going into new countries, a lot of new countries this year in 2015. So they're going to continue to grow. This is another piece of data. You've all seen this or heard this data. This is from Sandvine, Waterloo-based company just down the road here, that does this. They measure internet traffic, right? And they report by type of traffic. So you see video down here. So video, all types of video accounts for 54% of internet traffic during the peak time, right? And 34%, so more than half of video. And this includes YouTube and cat videos and all that stuff. It's all in here. And Netflix is more than half of that for 34%. So 34% of internet traffic at peak times is Netflix. Pretty big deal. By the way, I show here illegal downloads. BitTorrent's actually been reducing. Just wanted to point that out. All right, so the next one, and I think this is the biggest one. You've all heard this, and it starts in 2 weeks. It's called HBO Now. It's sort of a different flavor of what used to be called HBO Go, but this is HBO going digital solo. So this is from October when they had announced this, and I just pulled out this article because, see, at that point they hadn't called it HBO Now yet. It's called HBO Go. What they are saying at this point is that they will launch an independent OTT offering that is unbundled from having a cable subscription. That's what they're essentially saying. And the reason was, well, there are all these homes that HBO is not, that are not HBO subscribers, and we want to go after those homes. Right? So this was the situation before. HBO, 30-year-old company, roughly, born in a relationship with cable companies like this. They were intricately linked. Cable and HBO went together. Right? You couldn't say cable without saying HBO, or you couldn't say HBO without saying cable. And when they introduced HBO Go a number of years ago, their OTT portal, the only way you could get it was if you had HBO pay TV subscription. That was the rule. Right? And we knew one day they would break those links, but they did it. And they did it, and it starts 2 weeks from now. And that's huge because HBO is a big brand. It's it's not the most valuable cable channel, that's ESPN, but it's probably the second or the third most valuable cable channel in the US, and they've decided to break their relationship with cable. That's a pretty big deal. I think the ground shook that day, at least it did for me, but maybe I'm a little too close to this story, but for me the ground shook. Right? A few tidbits, it's $15 a month. Not that cheap, actually, when you consider that it typically costs $10 a month as a channel on cable. So it's actually more expensive than getting it as an add-on to your cable subscription. This I found was interesting. They're not doing their own streaming at this point. They're using MLB, which is another sort of deviant, right? This is Major League Baseball with their own channel on the internet. Right? Sorry, deviant, not the right term. Disruptive, that's the term. Their streaming infrastructure is to be provided by MLB. I don't know if this is a long-term thing, but essentially HBO wasn't ready with their own infrastructure, so they've gone to MLB. And they've also signed a 3-month exclusive deal with Apple. So in other words, initially it will only be available through Apple on Apple devices for 3 months. And I think this had to do with, they announced this, and I'm not sure they were really set up. Remember, they've never billed in their life. There was always cable companies that billed their service. Now they have to bill. So all of that will be dealt with Apple initially. All right, the next one, to me, is the most interesting one with respect to the big story that I want to tell. And there's 2 parts to the story, and it's CBS. CBS, as a customer, when I was at Miranda, CBS was the most legacy customer that we had, the most traditional broadcaster, right, that existed. In fact, their demographic is the oldest demographic of any U.S. broadcaster, right? And they are very traditional people. But they've done 2 things in the last 6 months that are pretty interesting. First one is a thing called CBC All Access. It's a subscription OTT service. You pay $6 a month to get access to CBS All Access. and it gives you a combination of network content and local TV content on the internet. Right? A few facts: $6 a month. You don't need cable subscription. Some programs are available the next day, so hit programs like what's the one with all the college professors? Big Bang Theory, yes. Right? And get those shows the next day. Back episodes and other older programs, right? So Hulu kind of stuff, but private to CBS. Includes streaming of live local TV, and they will be sharing revenues with the local stations, right? So they'll be taking some of that $6 and sharing it with the local stations. So this is like a new antenna for them, right? But here's my favorite part: unskippable digital ads. Let me get to this part. There's a second part to their digital strategy, CBS's. They also launched a news channel, an all-internet news channel. So this is like the CNN, but only on the internet. Live anchored news, 7 days a week. It's not 24 hours a day, 17 hours a day. It works with TVs and tablets. You don't need a cable subscription. They've got simulcasts of special news events from the main CBS network. But here are my favorite parts. It's live. I like this statement. It's called CBSN, and they called it the Cable Bypass News Channel. That's what the CEO of last week. So he wasn't hiding what he was doing. So this is over the top. I'm bypassing cable. And you know that CBS, all broadcasters and cable companies have been having these tuffles over revenue and sharing and all that kind of stuff. So that kind of makes sense. Here's my favorite part, though. And as I was preparing this presentation a few months ago, I did a screen grab to get this. It just so happened when I grabbed the screen, an ad ran. So I grabbed the screen again. But here's something that's interesting. Chrysler.ca. That ad that I saw, I was in Ottawa when I watched, because it's international, right? Did I write that somewhere there? It's available worldwide, right? So here I am in Ottawa watching CBS News on the web. An ad runs, and it's a Canadian ad. It was geolocated ad. That's digital, right? That's a digital ad because that was targeted to me, right? May not have been me as an individual, may have been me in a general geography, but it was targeted, right? Pretty interesting. Right? I just caught that. Just happened to do the screen grab and catch that that was Chrysler.ca. All right, next one from 2 months ago. Another, this is around CES time, right? Sling TV. So most of you might know Dish. Dish is sort of our equivalent to our Express View. They're the #2 satellite player in the U.S. The #1 being DirecTV. So they are a traditional pay TV distributor, but they have just launched a service called Sling. Sling TV. It's an internet TV subscription made up of traditional, it's linear and nonlinear, so live and on demand. But here's the difference, right? They were the first to do this. Unlike Netflix, they've actually signed up, not programs, but networks, right? So Disney, which includes ABC and ESPN, ESPN being most notable. You know, a bunch of different specialty channels. Local channels, you can get them. Right, it's $20 a month, so that's cheap. So it's like a $20 cable package, basic cable package. But if you want local TV channels, you have to pay more. Right? It's kind of the opposite to what we're used to. Right? And they're targeting cord nevers. These are 18 to 34-year-olds that have no cable subscription and probably never would. Right? That's another sort of shake the ground a little bit case, because they were the first ones to have sports ESPN, right? That coveted, this is the #1 cable channel, right? This is the one that makes the most money from subscription. So I'm sorry, but when you have HBO and ESPN making moves like this, the ground is moving. Right? Others have announced, Sony, and even I heard last week, Apple, are looking to do a similar thing, bundle traditional channels. The Sony one starts at $40, though it's a lot more expensive. Don't have any details on the Apple one. Here in Canada, our BDUs have done similar things. We weren't sure. My wife didn't know who Show Me was and who Crave was, but we know. Show Me is Rogers and Shaw, and Crave is Bell. right? So these are traditional pay TV distributors who are kind of doing it without specifically branding them necessarily, but they are OTT platforms. All right, so my takeaway for this section is, and I sort of have this picture. When I did this, I actually, before I showed this slide, I had everybody, I played a little song and I had 4 people do, and they're playing musical chairs, right? That's what our ecosystem is doing right now. There's a big game of musical chairs. They're all sort of disrupting each other's business, testing the limits, all those kind of things. So the ecosystem is in full-on violent disruption, right? And broadcasters of all sizes need to think, I would say innovate, and at this point take some risks. And that's what's going on. HBO, they're taking a risk, right? CBS, they're taking risks. All right, so my last section, right? And remember in this section here, I said 2 things that it changes. It changes how people watch TV, and it potentially changes how we monetize TV. I'm going to talk about how we monetize TV. I think I'm right on schedule. My timekeeper Denis here. I've also got a little countdown timer here. Okay. Good. All right. So remember, way back when, 3 sections ago, 672 slides ago, I talked about unicast streams being what makes OTT digital. Right? And I said that unicast streams allow fine targeting and precise measurement in contrast to broad targeting and imprecise measurements. So now I'm going to take the same source, the same PwC Global Entertainment and Media Outlook. I looked only at the US and only at advertising. And what I found was only the revenue for only advertising here. So there it goes again on its own node. Sorry, just a second. I don't know why it does that. One day I'll understand. So that's 2014, right? So advertising only revenue US, right? So many people have argued the $4.7 billion in advertising. This is things like Hulu and things like that. So far, the theory is that, sorry, let's do it again. So far, the theory is that all of this revenue has not come at the expense of this revenue. But if you look at the growth rates, almost 35% and flat, at some point, some of this revenue, advertising revenue, 60% of the industry's revenue, is going to start leaking this way. Right? It's got to happen. Right? So here's a quote, and it's an interesting quote. It says, this is from Omnicom Media Group, which is an advertising agency type thing. They are responsible for some pretty big names, Pepsi, Visa, McDonald's, Apple. And they're saying, we're counseling our clients to move between 10 and 25% of their TV dollars to online video, right? Depending on the target audience. Adding that sites like Hulu would be the big beneficiary. So this is from October of last year, so about 5 months ago. Pretty influential people. So these kinds of things are being discussed, are being said, right? These platforms are being noticed by advertisers and their agencies. Right? So I just wanted, and this particular sequence in my deck is about 3 months old, and to me it's very important. It actually tells the story of what's happened in other industries that do advertising. So I've taken numbers. I forget what the source was. The fact that I'm not citing it probably means I cheated, but so please don't tell anybody. But this is one of these big studies. It's probably PricewaterhouseCoopers. They were essentially, and I've lumped the numbers together. Here's all advertising spend in the US across all platforms. And I've kind of combined them to be TV, internet, and all others. So all others is things like newspapers, yellow pages, billboards, you name it, right? All the other traditional stuff, right? And this is in 2003. 2003, Google existed, but they weren't very big, right? So internet there is just strictly banner ads and stuff like that. So there's 2003, there's 2012, 10 years later, and what you'll notice And then here's my projections. I made this part up based on just an extrapolation. But what's going on, if you look at this time period, is internet advertising's gone from 3% to being 21% of advertising in the space of 12 years. Okay? And this internet here is not internet video. This is mostly banner ads and other types of advertising. Right? That's insane growth, right, over that period of time. 20% annual growth. If you look at television, hasn't done that bad. 3 to 4% annual growth. So we've gone from being 26% of all advertising spent in the US to be 36. Not bad, right? The big loser in this has been all these others, right? So this is the print, the direct mail, all that other stuff. They have so far been the big loser in this. So here's my message and here's my point. So TV's been making modest gains, and I think those gains over that period of time, if you look at that period of time, it's because of specialty channels growing and of compelling content and the attractiveness of video, and video being a premium advertising platform. That is a fact, right? But this growth here has come at the expense of non-digital schemes, things that are just not digital, newspapers, right? Billboards, things that can't be precisely measured, right? And can't be targeted very well. So imagine what video could do if it went digital. If instead of a conventional advertising model on a premium content, what if we had premium content and a modern advertising model? Imagine what could happen. Right? And that's kind of what my message